So our job as a marketing executive search firm is to find the very best talent for our clients. And the reality is that talent, when we go out and reach out to them, is not looking for a job. And then it becomes time, once we've engaged them in the opportunity and they're very interested in it, that they go in and interview. And it's not something that they've practiced at. It's not something that they're ready to do based on the fact that they weren't thinking about a new job when we called them. And interviewing is very different than anything else that you do in corporate America. It's almost the opposite of what you do on a day-to-day basis. On a day-to-day basis, you're focused on what's next for my company, what can I do to achieve success? And you may achieve 10 meaningful things in a day, and 8 of them you forget by the time you've had dinner. Now I've got to sit down in an interview process and talk about myself and talk about the things that I've done that are meaningful, that I've accomplished, that have moved things forward for the organization I was in. And most of those aren't at the top of my mind. I'm focused on other things. So it's very important when you go into interview, and especially as you get more senior in your career, what we find is that the competition gets much more difficult to get to that next level. And so it's really important that you take time to prepare. Well, how do I prepare to interview? And the reality is, if you're going to interview for 1 hour, you need to spend at least 1 hour researching the company. What do I need to know about company X? What do I need to know about where they want to go? What is my understanding of their culture, the challenges, the difficulties that they're having, and how am I going to help them overcome those? But that's only 1 hour. You need to spend at least 4 hours for every hour of interview time reviewing your own background, reviewing your own accomplishments, and writing out. And when I say writing out, I mean good old-fashioned handwriting. We as people are much more creative when we handwrite than when we type on a computer. And so I want you to go back to everything you've done before in every position that you've been in, starting with the most recent, but working backwards all the way through your career. What was the situation I was in when I started? What were the challenges that the organization was facing? What were my goals? What were the things that my boss said my bonus was based on? And then what were the results that I achieved relative to those challenges, relative to those goals that made a difference for my organization? And you'll be amazed at how much you remember that you completely forgot prior to starting this process. And you want to do that both for the marketing area that you're in. So if you're an e-commerce person or a direct response person or a brand person, what did I do relative to those specific challenges? If you're a chief marketing officer, how did I move the organization forward from a marketing perspective? You also want to do the same thing from a leadership perspective. For each role that you were in, what was my greatest hiring success? What was the time I turned a mediocre employee into a top-notch performer? What was the most difficult management challenge I had? And you want to outline that for every position where you actually had direct reports. What is your leadership style? And how did that leadership style mesh with the culture? And then you also want to go back and look at the culture of the organization that you were in, because making sure you find that right culture fit for your next opportunity is very important, which means you've got to take the time to go back and figure out what cultures you were in that made you successful in the first place. And so what was the culture? What did you enjoy about it? What would you change if you had the ability to? And so how do you take all this information and all these accomplishments and now put them in a logical format so they're top of mind? And you now have the ability to access them when you go into the interview process. Then, before you go into the interview, go ahead and compare those back to the job description. Compare those back to the challenges that that organization is facing, and make sure that you have some real ideas on how you can impact this company before you ever walk in the door. One of the other questions we have from candidates is, I'm going in for multiple interviews, right? I have a first round interview and then I'm called back for a second round interview. Well, what we talked about before was for every hour of interview time, you need to prepare 4 hours. So if you're going in for a 1 hour interview, you need to prepare for 4 hours. If you're going in for 6 hours of interviewing back to back, you now have to prepare for 24 hours. And so every time you go back in for a new round of interviews, the clock starts again on how much time you need to prepare. And that seems like a lot of time. I'm going to prepare for 24 hours. And the reality is, it's about right as a senior level executive for someone that wants to go in and get a senior level position. I need to be able to engage each one of those people in a meaningful dialogue based on where they sit in the organization. And in order to do that, I need to take the time to understand both my past accomplishments and successes, as well as how that may integrate and interact with where they are in the organization.